What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and this will be my first video diving into the gameplay of Breaker format. So I'm excited to dive into it. I sort of just made a very basic deck, taking the sort of hand control good stuff deck from Yada format and adding some of the new power cards from Breaker format, namely Breaker the Magical Warrior, Magical Scientist, and Tribe Infecting Virus. Now, in order to add these cards, I had to cut a couple cards, so I cut one reinforcement in the army. I think maybe you could keep two, as 2/2 warriors is okay. I also cut a Zanzalug, so that's where you get sort of the weirdness of that. But I think one is honestly fine. Uh, Hand control in this format's a bit weirder than normal, as you mainly do it to disrupt a combo, as you may see in some of the games to follow in the video. But I think in like a mirror match of this sort of thing, then it can be good. But it is kind of weird. I'm considering maybe cutting the Don's Lug and the reinforcement package altogether. But I think it's ultimately fine here. And you'll also notice that I switched out 3 Torrential Tribute for 3 Raigeki Break, as I think Raigeki Break is kind of vital to this format. You want to be able to disrupt a combo while it's going on, and we'll get into what that combo is in a minute once we get into the duels. So I think some other potentially good cards to remove might be either Yatagarasu or Spirit Reaper. These cards are a little bit slow. And while Spirit Reaper can protect you from battle, it's still kind of underwhelming. And Yada is just kind of like, if you pull out the Yada lock, that's great, and you can win the duel from that. But it is kind of situational, and oftentimes, like, I'm not really sure how much this will come up. So let's quickly just go through the card by card here. So we've got the Breaker, we've got Zaluk and Exiled Force, as I mentioned. Don Zaluk is great to bring off of a tomato to win a tomato war if you do wind up in those sorts of situations, which I could potentially see happening. So that's another reason to potentially include it. We've got a Fiber Jar here, resets the deck, that can be a bit scary in this format. But I think ultimately it's still worth including here. I mean, maybe it's better in the side, but I think that it will really depend on what the general meta for this format looks like in terms of whether some of these cards go on the side or the main. But I think Fiber Jar is a generally good card, so I think it's fine being here. I've got Injection Fairy Lily, Jinzo, Magical Scientist. You could play more than one copy of this, but I think one is fine. You can fetch it off of Tomato or a Witch or a Sangan, and I think one should be generally good. We've got Triple Tomato to fetch out some of our powerful monsters. We've got Sangan and Witch to search out pretty much anything in the deck. We've got Sinister Serpent, Spirit Reaper, Strive Infecting Virus, and Yatagarasu to finish things off. For the spells, we've got the standard lineup: Change of Heart, Confiscation, Darkhold, Delinquent Duo, Graceful Charity, Harvest Feather Duster, Mirage of Nightmare, Monster Reborn, Triple Mystical Space Typhoon, Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki. Reinforce the army, you can maybe cut this, as I mentioned earlier, Snatch Steal, and Forceful Sentry. For the traps, we've got Call of the Haunted, Imperial Order, Mirror Force, Triple Raigeki Break, and a Ring of Destruction. For the side deck, we do have some like standard side deck things. So we've got like a Bazooka Soul Eater or a Kaiku. In specific matchups, having these beaters can be pretty good. We've got a Heavy Storm for back removal, Double Nomen of Crossout, and a Ceasefire for more flip focus strategies. But the main thing we've got in the side deck is ways to deal with the Scientist FTK. And the main tools for that, we got triple King Tiger Wanghu. This can prevent any of their pieces from hitting the board, which can be very, very powerful and shut down their turns. We've got triple Torrential Tribute here. This is just sort of, it's like worse Raigeki Break at disrupting the combo, but it can disrupt the combo. It is a bit riskier, as you can't do it in the middle of the combo, and your opponent can just fire some last rolls afterwards, but I still think it's worth playing. And also, we've got triple Trap Dust Shoot. If you're up against Scientist FTK and they manage to FTK you game 1, you're likely going first game 2, and Trap Dust Shoot can disrupt their combo majorly. So, and I think once the combo's disrupted, the deck becomes a lot easier to beat. So that's really all you have to worry about. For the Fusion deck, we do have a full suite here. Now, at this time in the game's history, you could just bring out like any monster from the Fusion deck, essentially, because you could play with as big a Fusion deck as you wanted. So, realistically, if there is an extra card that you want to go into here, but you just don't have it in your Fusion deck, then you can just tell your opponent, hey, I'm bringing out this card, but it's actually standing in for this card. And that should be fine. But realistically, you're not really going to go into anything else besides this in your Fusion deck. You don't really have the tools to go into Scientist FTK here. So all you really need are like triple Balter, triple Senshi, triple Restrict, Dragoness and Darkfire, I guess, for level considerations potentially. If you can Skull Dragon, I think this is the worst of the sort of Balter Sentry Dragon suite, but it can come up. Reaper of the Nightmare won't be able to attack with Scientist, but there are potential uses for it. And Roaring Ocean Snake, just having a big beater with level 6. And lastly, a Super Robo Yari, which can get up to 2200, which is the highest attack on a monster you can bring out off a Scientist. Realistically, this should be all you need, but in weird edge cases, you can just say to your opponent, hey, I'm bringing out like Darkfire Dragon, but it's actually standing in for this card. So hopefully that won't come up, but because the only sort of rooms on DB that can do that are the GOAT format rooms, and this is playing cards that aren't legal in GOAT format, this is sort of the solution that we have to go with. But with all that being said, I think this deck is pretty sick. I think this deck will change a fair bit, though, as people develop the format further and see which cards are good in the Scientist mirror, or not mirror, but the Scientist match, which cards aren't, and how prevalent the Scientist matchup is in this format. So let's just dive into some games and see how they go. Okay, we've got a game against Gabibo Balandi, who is a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We are playing the Good Stuff deck. And we really do want to win the die roll here because if we're not going first, we could potentially get FTK'd. And our opponent does win the die roll, so let's just hope that they aren't playing Scientist and they don't have the combo turn 1. They're playing 41 cards, so hopefully that means they're less likely to open the combo. They got Pot of Greed, though. That will help them out quite a bit there, though. They're going to go for Reasoning, and we are just going to call 5. And the reason we call 5 instead of 1 is because if they've got a Scientist in hand, then they can just summon out the Scientists if they manage to bring a Catapult Turtle off the Reasoning and just win that way. But if they've got a Catapult Turtle in hand, then it's a bit harder for them to actually bring that out and pull off the FTK. They could potentially use Scientist Effect to bring in a monster, tribute out a monster, summon out Catapult Turtle, but then they don't actually have enough life points to pull off the full FTK on its own. There are ways around that with things like Last Will adding more monsters to board, but I think in general, just calling 5 here is probably the better option, unless you have other information. We do actually manage to hit the Catapult Turtle, so I feel really good about that. And I think that was the correct choice. And they do indeed have the Scientist in hand. So if we hadn't called 5, this would have just been the end of the game. So I think that was the correct play. Unfortunately, they just have Monster Reborn, so that will be the end of the game either way. But, you know, we couldn't really play around that. So we had to do what we had to do there. And we still will lose this game. They've got Last Will as well and Gillosaurus, so this is just mega over for us. But, yeah, I think this is ultimately fine. And they're just going to pull off the combo for YouTube here. So the guild sources, you know, they add a bit of cherry on top at dealing an additional 700 damage each, along with the Last Will. But realistically, with the Catapult Turtle and Scientist, you've got the full combo already, and you'll see that here. So our opponent's going to pay 3 times for Scientist, bring out Roaring Sea Snake, and Roaring Sea Snake, each at 2100 attack, and the Turtle will tribute off all of those and drop us down to 3450. Then the Science player is going to pay 3 more times, bring out 3 copies of another 2100 beater. It could be Punished Eagle, could be Empress Judge as well, and that will drop us down by 3150 more. And you'll note that if they hadn't actually attributed off the 2 Gillosauruses, we would have been at 1700 here. And they would have been able to use Scientist again one more time, since they're only at 2,000 life points, to bring out another 2,100, drop us down by 1050 more, which would bring us down to, I believe, what it would be 650, right? Yeah, it would be 650. 1700 minus 1050 is 650. And then tributing off the Scientist would be 150 more, bring us down to 500. And then the Catapult Turtle contribute itself off for that last 500. So they add the guild sources, so they don't have to do that. They're just going to tribute the Catapult Turtle. And that will indeed be the end of the game. So kind of a shame. Raigeki Break could have actually potentially dealt with this combo. Although they had Last Will, so I don't even think that would have done it. So I think we were probably dead here, even if we'd gone second, which is kind of crazy to say. But it's just how it goes sometimes. The remaining 2 cards in hand wouldn't have done anything about our Raigeki Break, so really would have depended on what the top card was. But yeah, I think we probably would have lost this game even if we had gone first, which is kind of wild to think about. but it can happen in this format. Scientist is a very deadly threat. We are just going to bring in a bunch of our hate for it. So we're going to bring in the triple dust shoot, triple torrential tribute, and also the triple Wang Hu. Actually, I don't bring in Wang Hu this game. I bring in Wang Hu in a later game. I think. Yeah, I don't think I bring Wang Hu this game. I'm sort of experimenting with side decking in this format here. So for instance, this game I side out like Reaper, Yada, I side out triple MST, and I side out Mirage of Nightmare as well, because I figure MST will be less valuable in this situation. So I'm just trying to disrupt the combo. I don't really care about as much of their back row. And if I'm taking out the MSTs, I should probably take out Mirage, as a bit less consistent that way. So that's what I go with there. Those are the 6 cards I side in and out. I think I should have probably brought in Wang Hu, as you'll see later in the video that Wang Hu is kind of crazy against Scientist. But you'll also see here that Dust Shoot can also be kind of crazy going first. So we're just going to set the Dust Shoot, set a TT, and set a Raigeki Break, pass back to our opponent. This does play into like Harpy's Feather Duster, Heavy Storm, and stuff. But if they've got that, they've got that, right? Like, we've got to play as if they don't. And hope that if they do have that, they don't have the full combo. At least Dust Shoot will be able to give us a peek of their hand, so we'll know what they're on here and see what they're working with. So they're going to banish their hand so we can see. We see that the only monster they got is Fiber Jar, so that's all we'll be able to shuffle back. But knowing the content of their hand and knowing what we have to play around is very, very valuable here. So we see they've got Raigeki, Reasoning, Monster Reborn, Imperial Order, and Metamorphosis here. So that's only really access to a couple monsters in the forms of Reasoning and Reborn. So they won't likely be able to pull off the combo this turn. So that's perfectly fine by us. We'll shuffle back that Fiber Jar, add back everything else to their hand here. And yeah, that will be a-okay for us. Now they're going to go for the Reasoning here, which is kind of their only option. And we call 5. We think about it a bit, but we do call 5. I think maybe this was a bit of a mistake, as if they bring out Catapult Turtle, or if they bring out Scientist, then we can clear it with Tribe Infecting, and it's only 1,000 or 300 in either case. They're probably playing a variety of level 4 monsters, though that might not be the case. A lot of the Scientist decks do cut out the Recruiters, so maybe they're playing more level 3s in the form of Gilosauruses and like Sangans and stuff. But I think maybe I should have called 4. It's a bit tricky. When you know they can't pull off the combo, it's kind of weird in this scenario. But yeah, so they do hit a 4, and yeah, I think maybe I should have called 4 for this reason. But again, like, Cannon Soldier could be the only 4 that they're on. So is it really valuable to get rid of the Cannon Soldier? I mean, that probably would be the most damage here. So maybe that would have been more to call 4 in that case. But I don't know. It's really tough to say. Also, maybe I should have called 1, because if they had brought up Scientist, Metamorphosis for like a level 6, and then tributed off with Meta for a Ryu Senshi, that would be pretty bad for us. But we do have like the Torrential Tribute in that case, so we could stop it that way. It would cause them to lose life points. So yeah, I don't know. It was a weird Reasoning call for sure. I'm not really sure there was a correct answer, but either way, we save our disruption for later. We don't really need to use our TT or Raigeki Break on this, because we are doing ultimately fine. We're going to fire Snatch Steal. We do know about the Imperial Order, but this causes them to use up the Imperial Order, and based on their hand, they don't really have any way to play without having Imperial Order up, or with having Imperial Order up. So they need to drop the Imperial Order soon, so this just kind of trades with it. I'm ultimately fine making this trade. So we're going to attack in to their Cannon Soldier with the Tribe Infecting Virus in hand and just pass back to them. We could have discarded a card here, but we do know about Reborn. We don't want to give them a Lily. So yeah, they're going to let the Imperial Order lapse here. They're going to go for Raigeki, set 1, fire a Mirage, and pass back to us. Now, we are thinking here because we know that they don't have an MST set, because we know that it's just Meta and Reborn. So if they don't draw like an MST, then they're losing a lot of cards to the graveyard, but they will have a Reborn to bring back some of them. So I feel like it's probably just better to, in our draw phase, go for the Raigeki Break. We do it in our draw because that way, if we do draw a card here, that could potentially be better to pitch, then we could pitch it. But as is, I think the best card to pitch here is Injection Fairy Lily. We do know about the Reborn, so they could potentially get in for a fair amount of damage, but that'll also cost them some life points, so I think it's ultimately fine. We're going to go for Pot here. We draw Graceful as well, so we're just going to go for that too. And this is a pretty decent hand, although the Fiber Jar is kind of annoying. I think in the future I should side out Fiber Jar. I was keeping it in here again because I was trying to like experiment with what the side deck should be and what the side deck strategy should be, but I think this is ultimately fine. We're going to bring out a Witch, and we've got Mirror Force as well for later. Got Torrent's Tribute too. So ultimately, I think I'm okay with them reborning like Lily and attacking in. We draw Mystic Tomato, so we're going to go for that as well. Summing out that Tomato, hitting in here. They've got a Scapegoat, so that's kind of unfortunate. But we're actually not going to TT this as we lose a lot of monsters here. And also, this is fine. They have to do something else in order to clear our board. So we want them to actually do that before going for the TT. They're going to go for a Metamorphosis here, tripping off a token for a 1000 Restrict. We're just going to fire a TT here. Now, I could have also waited for the attack and then fired Mirror Force, but TT also clears the token. We're losing the Tomato either way, and we get a Search off the Witch this way. So I think ultimately the TT here was the better option. And we're going to add this Breaker to hand. Just force them to use up the Reborn now. We've got Mirror Force to deal with if they bring out like a Lily. And so I feel ultimately fine about this. They are indeed going to go for the Reborn here and bring back the Lily, which is their best option to take, I think. And unfortunately, the last card in hand is Heavy Storm. So that will clear the Mirror Force. We're going to be taking a hefty amount of damage here. But we got the Raigeki in hand. So this means that we can deal with the Lily and still have a pretty big beater here. We draw Scientist. Not the best in this scenario. We can just clear the Lily with it, but I don't really want to do that. I want to get aggressive, given that they're on no cards. So we're just going to bring out this Breaker, fire a Raigeki, and attack in for 19 here. There are very few things that like outright kill us here. Now, Pot of Greed could potentially draw them into something that can, but I think overall we're fine with this. They're going to set one, and Reborn should do it. We're going to use up the counter on Breaker, pop the back row, fire this Reborn here, bringing back a Cannon Soldier, and that will be the end of the game here. So I think this was a very, very good showing for the deck in Game 2. We were able to use the Dust Shoots to disrupt their combo, although, I mean, Fiber Jar is good to get rid of, right? Because Fiber Jar resets their hand, potentially draws them into the combo anyways. So I think that, you know, we did side pretty decently for this matchup here. Although going into Game 3, I actually do make some more changes to the side deck. I bring in the Wanghu's and I side out the Dust Shoots, as Dust Shoots a lot less good going second. So I think Wanghu will probably be better going first. Set up Wanghu turn 1, and it can be really annoying for your opponent to deal with. So I'm going to bring in the Wanghu's for the Dust Shoots here. And let's see what happens. I think I should probably side out things like Fiber Jar and things like that. But, you know, I think this is ultimately fine. Our opponent's going to open with a Pot of Greed. That's a bit worrying. They're going to open with a Graceful Charity as well. So this is really, really concerning, as they might just have the FTK here. They're going to go for Reason. We're again going to call 5. They unfortunately hit a Cannon Soldier again, and so they do have a monster here that can trigger Last Will, which is a bit worrying. But they say in chat, which means that they probably don't have the FTK online right now, which is very nice. They're just going to set one, pass back to us. And, you know, the game's going to get, like, somewhat TDs from this point on, so I'm just going to check their hand, see what they've got, see if there was an FTK line that they potentially missed here. So I hope that you all don't mind a peek behind the curtain. So yeah, they've got ways to trigger this Last Will in hand, but Double Gillosaurus will not quite help them here. And yeah, if they'd gotten like Scientist, now, I mean, okay, so there was potentially something they could have done here. If they tributed off the Cannon Soldier, they could have Last Willed out a Scientist. Scientist out like level 5 Fusion, and then Metamorphosis it away for like a Dark Balter, which is very, very strong. They've got Woboku as well to protect the Balter. Although there are things that can deal with the Balter, so I understand not going for that level of commitment. Especially because here you potentially have a good setup for later turns. So yeah, I think that they probably played this fine. However, their passivity in this will allow us to just set up a Wanghu here, attack into the Cannon Soldier, and this kind of shuts down everything they've got. They're going to let that go to grave here, and I think that makes sense, as there's not really much they can do. in this scenario. They're going to set one and pass back to us, and we're just going to hit into the set. We can't bring out any of our other monsters besides Wang Hu here, and I want to save this Wang Hu in case they would clear the first Wang Hu. They're going to go for Waboku here, and it's just a Gillosaurus, so they can't really do anything about that. This does preserve the Gillosaurus on field in case they've got a tribute monster, and they're just going to tribute set here, which I think is smart. And then they're going to go for a meta, tributing off that Catapult Turtle for a Dark Bolter here. So Dark Bolter will be able to potentially hit in to this Wang Hu. Unfortunately for our opponent, we do have Raigeki Break. So if they had gone for Fiend Skull Dragon here, they actually would have been able to clear the Wang Hu. And that would have been actually really annoying for us. So we actually might have lost the game in that instance. So yeah, they probably should have gone for Fiend Skull here. If they had gone for Fiend Skull, we wouldn't have been able to target with Raigeki Break. We would have been able to target whatever else they brought out. So, I mean, let's see what they had to work with here. They had Reasoning. They could have Reasoninged. They also could have last willed out like a Scientist. Yes, they potentially had access to the FTK here. Or I guess the OTK in this case. But I think the Raigeki Break would have caused some difficulties for them, as they would have had to last will out one of the pieces, so they would have used that. And once I Raigeki Breaked like the Scientist after paid the first 1,000, then they would have been in a really tough spot. So I think we still would have been okay here, although a Fiend Skull on field is kind of annoying, but we do have ways to deal with that in deck. So yeah, I think we would have been fine either way. The Fiend Skull would have just made things a bit more difficult for us. They're going to go for a Reasoning here. We're going to call 4, because if they do have a monster that can beat over Wang Hu, it is likely level 4. And they mill a Scientist. So they will be able to bring out the Scientist, but that will be popped by the Wang Hu here. So yeah, if they actually would have potentially been able to pull off the combo, because they have Reasoning to bring out Scientist, and then they'd have the last one to bring out another Catapult Turtle. Although we probably would have called 1 instead of 5 here, because they already summoned this turn, and Scientist is a bit more annoying to deal with. So yeah, they might not have been able to get the Scientist on field, but it would have been a potential option for them. But Wang Hu will indeed pop that. They've got Last Will to bring out the Catapult Turtle. That will again be popped by Wang Hu, and this is why Wang Hu is so strong here. And they're going to pass back to us. We draw Forceful, which is just insane. We're going to flip up this Witch, attack in for 2,800 here. And yeah, I mean, we could have potentially summoned out the Wang Hu and gone even more aggressive here, but I think it's ultimately fine. So we're just going to send back the Gillosaurus in case they've got any sort of shenanigans here. I don't want them to do any special summoning, although maybe I should send back the Cannon Soldier, as Cannon Soldier can tribute itself off for Last Will. So there's a debate about that, but yeah, they're just going to set one pass back to us. We draw Graceful Charity. We're just going to go for Graceful here, see if we get a way to deal with that back row. We do not, but Pot of Greed is still very good. So we're going to draw. Unfortunately, we don't have a way to deal with the back row, and we're not really going to risk summoning the other Wang Hu just for a lethal shot. I feel like we've got this game pretty wrapped up here either way, especially because we've got the Zaluk to discard that last card in hand. We're just going to set the Sinister Serpent here. If that gets cleared, that's fine. They're going to Jar of Greed here. Set 2, pass back to us. We draw another Wang Hu. Now, something we could potentially do here is go for Dark Hole, search out Breaker, and then Breaker pop their back row. But Mirror Force is limited, and Torrential Tribute is not. So I think it's ultimately fine just to play into the TT a bit. We're going to attack into the set with Wang Hu here. It is a Sangan, so they'll get a search here. But ultimately, this won't be enough, and they will indeed... Okay, or it will be enough. Waboku there. So I guess they live another turn, but not really much they can do here. They just have to pass back to us, and that will be the end of the game. Looks like they drew a will. They could have summoned Scientist, willed out something, but that also would have been popped by Wang Hu. So yeah, nothing they could really do there. And this shows how powerful Wang Hu can be against this matchup. So very interesting match 1 here. Again, maybe if they had gone for Fiend Skull instead of Dark Bolter, it would have been more of a game. But, as I mentioned, we could have just Raigeki Breaked the Scientist, and that would have been fine. They would have still had Fiend Skull, which would have been annoying, but, Fiend Skull does not negate Witch, and Witch could have searched out something else, so I think that this was ultimately fine. But But yeah, it is a bit interesting. This game 3 could have potentially gone a different way if they had gone for Fiend Skull instead. But, who's to say? That's Yu-Gi-Oh, right? People play the way that they play, and I think Dark Bolter was not a bad option, especially because it shuts me down next turn. So if my back row was a bluff, then Bolter would have potentially been good. But, I mean, I don't think my opponent saw Raigeki break out of me. Oh, they saw it against Mirage, so there's that. But, yeah, I think it's fine to play around some other stuff rather than Raigeki break. But anyways, that was match 1. We enjoyed this match so much that we wanted to dive into a second match. So let's show off that match as well. Okay, we've got our second match against Gabiba Balandi here. We're both playing the same decks. This was just a rematch. So they are playing the Scientist FTK, and luckily we do go first. That is huge. That is really big. Because if they had FTK here, then it would have been all over for us. So we draw a, wow, this hand is really stacked. So we're going to go for just a set tomato, and then we're just going to set our hand here. And the reason we do this instead of fighting the pot is that we want to get the most draws off Mirage as possible. We do have MST to deal with the Mirage, and they're kind of disincentivized from firing a Harpies here. If they do have a Harpies or Heavy Storm, then that's really unfortunate for us because we do lose the pot. But if you think about how many cards we're gaining here, we're gaining the same amount of cards either way. Because the 2 cards we draw off of pot would just be 2 cards that we draw off Mirage Nightmare normally. If we drew off of pot first and drew like a Spell Trap to set, then again, it's sort of the same sort of thing. We're drawing the same amount of cards off Mirage either way. So I think this is the way to go. We're going to pass back to our opponent. And they don't have the MST for the Mirage, so we'll draw 3 here. We actually draw another MST, which is kind of nice if they blind snipe some of our back row, hoping to hit an MST. We've got another in hand. They're going to go for a painful choice here, and that is fine by us. They're going to send Scientist, Last Will, Scientist, and a Reborn. We're not giving them that Reborn for sure. I think what we want to give them here is Scientist. As weird as that may sound, because Last Will can search them out anything that they might not have in hand. And if they're sending 2 Scientists, they might already have Scientists ready to go. The only real interaction here we have is Mirror Force, which is a bit worrying. But if they just summon Scientist, then I think that's fine. Like, if they've got Catapult Turtle in hand and a way to bring it out and tribute off for, like, a Last Will trigger, then that just ends the game right there. But if they've just got Scientist, they have to, like, they can just normal summon Scientist, and that's, like, it, right? So I think that ultimately it's fine. They could bring out Scientist, bring out Restrict, and then take the Tomato, which is unfortunate, but ultimately I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. So yeah, I'm fine with this. They can add back Scientist. Let's hope we don't get punished for this. They do have the Gillosaurus here. So if they had a Catapult Turtle as well, then that would have been the end of the game. They've got Premature Burial here as well. We are not going to let that go through. We do have the MST in hand for our Mirage, so we're just going to fire an MST on that Premature Burial because that is, we just can't let them do that. I mean, that could potentially just be the end of the game right here. So we've got to do that. They do indeed have the turtle in hand here. So we would have actually, so if they'd gone first, we would have been FTK'd here. But as is, we have disrupted the FTK, so that's very nice. And they do indeed have the turtle here. They're going to set that and go for a meta here, bringing out a Dark Balter, which is actually a really good play in this instance. As Dark Balter deals with more sets than, Fiend Skull Dragon does. Because, Fiend Skull Dragon does prevent being destroyed by, like, Raigeki Break or something, but it doesn't stop things like Sangan, Witch, Mystic Tomato, etc., which can just search out a way to deal with Fiend Skull anyways. So I think that Balter is the better play here. If I do have Raigeki Break, it is punished. But I think this is ultimately pretty good. They do think a little bit more about this to go into Fiend Skull potentially, but I think the Dark Balter is the better choice in this specific scenario. So they do go for Balter here, attack into our set. We do have Mirror Force though, so we will be able to pop that. And yeah, they're going to just set one pass back to us here. And we, in draw phase, will just go for the Mirage here. And they actually say thanks, so we are just going to let that, reset to that point. I did act pretty quickly. And they're going to think about chaining the call, bring back Balter. Now, the thing is, you can't actually bring back a Balter that's been brought out off of, like, Metamorphosis or Scientist, because they're not properly summoned. So, basically, with fusion monsters, if you want to be able to special summon them later in the game after they've been cleared from the field, you have to have actually fusion summoned them. And unfortunately, Balter has not been fusion summoned, so it can't actually be brought out in a special summon to the field. So this is actually not, able to happen here. And so yeah, so they're just going to, they're going to check that ruling just to make sure. And yeah, it doesn't actually work that way. So they won't be able to bring back Balter. So they're just going to reset the call. If I was, more of a stickler, I would have said, oh, you've got to bring back one of your other monsters instead off that call. But I mean, it's fine. I think we've got this game unlocked either way. We're going to go for Pot of Greed here just to see what we draw. I think we probably should have just tributed it over the tomato for Jinzo first and then gone for Pot, just in case they had, like, Imperial Order. But if they had Imperial Order, then we'd know about it and could potentially, like, construct our play in a different way. But I think as is, the Pot here is fine. We're just going to bring out Jinzo, shut down whatever back row they may have. And then we've got a Sentry or a Comfy to clear the last card in hand. So the last card in hand is just Scientist. We're going to shuffle that away. We're then going to set one here and pass back to them. They're going to go for Reasoning here, and we're going to think about this, and we are indeed going to call a 1, because if they hit a Scientist, they can't actually bring out like a Restrict, which can deal with Jinzo, and we don't want that. So they hit a 4 off of the Cannon Soldier here, and they're just going to pass back to us. If we draw another hand rip, I mean, it's not really useful here, but then again, I think we're going to win. I don't see how we're losing this. And it can serve as like another bluff here, at least. They're just going to draw one, pass back to us, and this should be the end of the game. We've got Zalug, and that it will indeed be the end of the game. So we did manage to win game 1 in this scenario, but if the Scientist deck had gone first, we would have lost, which does show the power of the Scientist FTK. And maybe implies that it will be a pretty big thing in the metagame here. Now, for game 2, we actually don't bring in the Dust Shoots because we're going second, because our opponent won. So we're going to bring in the triple Wanghu, triple TT. We actually keep in the MSTs and Mirage this time, because seeing that MST works well against Premature Burial, Call of the Haunted, etc., it can actually be meaningful interaction on their turn. So I'm pretty sure what we side out here is the Don Zalug. I think we side out the Yada and Spirit Reaper, as we did last time as well. And I think for the remainder, I'm trying to think what we sided out. I think we maybe did the Fiber Jar. I think we also maybe did some of the hand rips. I don't quite remember. I need to get better about recording on my side deck, sort of switching in these games. But yeah, there was a lot of side deck switching in this video, so some of it gets lost between the cracks. But I do bring in the Wanghus and the TTs, or maybe I just bring in the Wanghus. I might just bring in the Wanghus, because TT's kind of awkward if I've got a Wanghu established, but I mean, we'll see. So we are going to be going second here. If they've got the combo first turn, they've got the combo first turn. Nope, I do bring in the TT. So yeah, I think I probably also should have maybe set it out Lily, as it's a bit of a scary card if our opponent reborns it against us, but I mean, I think it should be fine. We draw a Wanghu here, and so we're just going to bring that out. And it worked well last time, so we're going to see if it works well this time as well. We're just going to fire Mirage, set 2, pass back to our opponent. Now, we don't actually have a way... Well, I mean, we could Raigeki Break to clear the Mirage, so that kind of goes even on cards, but I think drawing more is still pretty decent. We are just going to use Raigeki Break, clear the Mirage in the draw phase there, discarding a Lily. And then we're going to hit in for 17 off our Wanghu. That will indeed go through. We're just going to set the Sangan here, set a Mirror Force, pass back to them. We do have 2 cards in hand, which kind of plays into duo. But if they want a duo, they drop 1,000 more, and that gets them even further from doing anything remotely similar to an FTK or an OTK. So our opponent's going to go for a Pot of Greed here, draw 2 more, and then they're going to set 1, fire Painful here. And I think they should have fired Painful before they set, as now I know that they can't normal summon or set this turn. But they search out a bunch of traps anyways. I'm going to give them the Negate Attack, because Negate Attack is not necessarily like chainable to back row removal. And Ring can clear Wanghu, and we do not want to give them a way to clear Wanghu there. So they're going to add back the Negate Attack there, set that, pass back to us. We draw Witch, which is pretty good. Flip up the Sangan here, attack into their set. They've got Negate Attack, which is ultimately fine by us. We're just going to set the Witch, pass back to them. We could potentially Raigeki their set, but given they didn't, send a bunch of spells, and I really don't think they're playing Mask of Darkness in this deck, I think it's fine. If they sent a bunch of spells, maybe I would have Raigeki'd, because, could have been like Magician of Faith or something to bring back a powerful spell to clear our board, but I think this is ultimately fine. Opponent's going to tribute set over the Cannon Soldier here, and then go for a meta again. And probably bring out like Baltra or Fiend Skull here, and they will indeed bring out the Fiend Skull to play around the Raigeki break, and I think that is the correct choice here, as you do just want to clear the Wang Hu. And Fiend Skull is immune to targeted trap effects. Now, unfortunately, that won't matter here because we do have the Mirror Force to clear that, which is a bit unfortunate for them. And yeah, so they're just going to pass back to us. They can't do anything here. And I think this will potentially be the end game. We're going to go for a pot here. And yeah, they've got Scapegoat. We drew an MST to deal with that. We also drew Breaker to deal with that. So we were winning here either way. But that will indeed be the end of the game. If we didn't have the Mirror Force, I think the Torrential Retreat would have still done some work. Although it would have been a lot iffier. I would have had to use the Torrential like into a, like whenever Scientists hit the field, basically. Which our opponent could play around. They actually had a pre-stacked hand. We actually do discuss this like afterwards. Like if I had just Torrential Attributed the Fiend Skull Dragon, if I didn't have Mirror Force, for instance, then I think I actually would have potentially lost here, as they've got so many ways to both bring monsters back in the form of Reborn and Premat. They've got Catapult Turtle, they've got Metamorphosis, they've got Last Will. I mean, it's just insane. So even with only 4 Scientist activations, they probably could have pushed through and won there if we didn't have the Mirror Force to deal with the Fiend Skull. But this was a very interesting set of games against Scientist FTK. I think Scientist FTK will still be one of the best decks in the format. People are still labbing out the deck and optimizing it. So I think maybe with more optimization, the deck can get even more powerful. But I mean, as you saw in these games, the deck can easily FTK. I mean, we saw that game 1 in both matches. Just because we won game 1 of this match, if we had lost the rock, paper, scissors, we would have lost that game. So we might have been able to sort of do what we did in the first match and, clawed our ways back in games 2 and 3. But it is a very, very dangerous deck, one that you have to be on the lookout for in Breaker format, and one that you've got to sort of consider when building a deck. And as I mentioned in the deck breakdown part of the video, there are certain cards that maybe will get put in the side deck instead of the main deck, depending on how prevalent Scientist FTK is. Things like Fiber Jar could maybe not be in the main deck, despite how good it is if it's going up against a deck that is not Scientist FTK. So I'm curious to see how developments in this format will shift the way that people build decks. I think that is where the most interesting parts of this format do lie. Some decks I think, or some formats I think, are more deck building formats and some formats are more gameplay formats. There's an element of both in any format that you play. But I think that the interesting features of a given format can potentially lie more in one or the other. And I think this format definitely is more interesting on a deck building perspective. But this is just from, playing this game 1 with just a pretty standard, like, good stuff deck. I honestly just sort of threw in the good cards from Magician's Force into a standard sort of good stuff deck from the previous format. So, this is definitely like sort of some lazy deck building on my part. And I think in the future with more, thoughtful deck building, with deck building, that takes into account how the meta actually shapes up, it could be a lot more interesting and could look quite different. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on both these decks in this format as a whole based on these first games. Do you think that the existence of Scientist FTK is just completely degenerate despite the fact that we managed to win twice against it? Or do you think that it actually presents an interesting deck building challenge and it's just one of those decks in a format that you have to learn to adapt to and it actually isn't as threatening? Let me know down in the comments below. And also, if you enjoy this content, please be sure to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. We're at around 920 subscribers now, which is really awesome to see. We're so close to 1,000, and it would be great to get there by the end of the month. So definitely subscribe if you're not already. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.